Vikram, YouTube. No, what's the? Yeah. ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಓಕೆ ಹಳದಲ್ಲ ಹೊಸದು ಓಕೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಲೈವ್ ನೋ ಸರ್ ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಶ್ರೀರಾಮ್ ಸರ್ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ವಿಡಿಯೋ ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಇನ್ಫೆಕ್ಷನ್ A very good morning to all the participants who have joined for this 5 days virtual short-term training program on Industry 4.0, which has been sponsored by AICTE. On behalf of Nitin Meenakshi Institute of Technology and also our training partner Festo India Private Limited, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants who have joined from across the country. To introduce myself, I'm Mr. Prashant. I'm working as assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I'll be your host for this 5 days training program. And along with me, I have my co-coordinator, Mr. Vikram. Both of us will be coordinating this particular program for the remaining days. At the outset, I would like to give some brief guidelines for all the participants before we officially inaugurate this particular program. I would like to brief all the participants. We will be having a brief inaugural ceremony of this particular program, and followed by that, the session will commence. Usually, we'll be having 2 sessions per day. That is from 10:30 to 12 p.m. And in the afternoon, we'll be having from 2 to 3:30 p.m. That is the basic schedule that we have planned for the 5 days event. For all the 5 days, we'll be having the same Google Meet link and also the same YouTube streaming link. We request all the participants to kindly first join the Google Meet so that you can easily interact with all the speakers. If the Google Meet slots are filled, then you can definitely watch the program or participate in the program using YouTube streaming link. I would also request all the participants to kindly mute the audio as well as their video during the program. The trainers, when they wish to open up the platform for discussions, the participants are free to unmute and they can speak. With that, I would like to now officially request my colleague. I would now request my colleague, Mr. Sriram, to invocate the blessings of Almighty.
Good morning. I'm presenting the invocation song. Mahaganapatim manasa smarami Mahaganapatim manasa smarami Mahaganapatim महादेवसुतं गुरुगुहनुतं महादेवसुतं गुरुगुहनुतं मारिकोटि प्रकाशं शान्तं महाकाव्यनाटकादिप्रियम् महाकाव्यनाटकादिप्रियं मूषिकवाहनमोदकप्रियं महागणपतिं मनसा स्मरामि महागणपतिं मनसा स्मरामि महागणपतिम् Thank you.
Thank you, Sriram sir. Now, I would request Dean sir, Dr. V. Sridhar sir, to kindly address.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to inaugurate this Industry 4.0 national level AICT sponsored virtual short-term training program under ACWIS. This program is from today, that is 24th to 28th August 2020. On behalf of NMIT, I welcome all the participants who are here and also who are participating virtually from various locations. I am very happy to announce that there are totally 1,020 participants across the country who are participating in this workshop. This is the second series workshop sponsored by AICTE. The first one we conducted successfully from 12th to 16th August, that is Industrial IoT, and this is Industry 4.0, where we are conducting this Industry 4.0 with our training partner Festo. I am very happy to say that this training program, this workshop, is not just a workshop like what normally we used to do in our institution. This is the industry oriented workshop where we are taking you to virtual environment of the industry, where how this 4.0 industry 4.0 is practically is happening, that will be demonstrated, and this is mainly by the experts of Festo. This industry 4.0 workshop is very important. The way back in 1770, the first industrial revolution started. As we know that the first industrial revolution is mainly because of the invention of steam engines by James Watt, and it has been steam driven industry where we started working with the equipments and machines. The second, after exactly almost 100 years, the automation started in the industry, mass production took place, and that is the development of the expansion of the industry. And almost approximately 100 here, the automation started in the industry, that is the computer driven system, and now this is the where industry, the fourth revolution, industrial revolution, that is industry 4.0. This is mainly of connectivity. This is a very, this environment is that 4.0 connectivity is smart manufacturing practices, that is smart interconnected pervasive environment where all the equipments are connected, are interconnected with smartly. And here not only the equipment connection, this is the integration vertical and horizontally, that is right from the generating the what you call the requirement, the raw material. This is a smart supply chain management will be there, how the raw material is coming to the industry point to point, and everything will be detected, and when it will be coming, where it is there, when it will be reaching the industry. Once it comes to the industry, again the movement of the raw material also will be tracked, and it will be what you call the smart supply chain process. that is the tracking environment. This is mainly this 4.0. Earlier, all industry was centralized and it will be controlled centralized. Now, in this particular 4.0 is a decentralization. Every equipment has got its own task and all are smart, and this is what you call mainly dependent on the collection and data analysis of in real-time environment, where we are using the artificial intelligence, data analytic, and all components in production now talk to each other, and it will make necessary changes if required. And it is a self-corrective process is also there. Therefore, this industry 4.0 is very important to to manufacture the thing, and production will be really efficient, and we can do personalization according to the customer need, and and all the equipments can do very what you call the complex task. For this 4.0 it is very much required, particularly for the academic institution. The faculty should also know about the 4.0, and we need the what you call the faculty from other department. Interdisciplinary involvement also should be required. In 4.0 it is very much important of the effective communication, how we can effectively communicate between the equipments and equipment, that is the computer knowledge is required, and problem solving technique depending upon the data what the equipment generates and the problem what evolved at each time. Therefore, we have to solve that one. That is a problem solving techniques should be known, and also the what you call management technique is also very important, and participation of interdisciplinary what you call this interdisciplinary environment, the mechanical people, the electronics, the computer science, and all what you call the faculty, and also the knowledge is required for industry 4.0. Therefore, this is a very important workshop, and the participation of all the faculty and also the experts from various branches is very important. They should gain the knowledge about that, where our country is our country is moving ahead in towards development, manufacturing, and to a competitive world. In order to make our Make in India project successfully, we have to implement Industry 4.0. I request all the participants to participate with dedication, and also without any abstainment. They have to participate in this workshop 4.0, which is very, very important. And this is mainly our training partner, Festo. They are conducting this workshop where the training will be given through the industry people in the real-time environment. Therefore, I request all the participants to participate in this workshop without any what you call fail, and that all the 4 days they have to participate. I request them to participate, and this is a very important workshop. I hereby thank AICTE and also our college management who have made this Industry 4.0 the workshop to start on this day, and provided all the facility to conduct this workshop. And I thank our principal. Now he has come. He will talk few words about this. I request all the participants to patiently to hear the next address by our principal, Dr. H.C. Nagaraj.
Very good morning to you all. Our respected President Sri Vinay Hegde, our advisor Rina Shetty, our administrator Rohit Punja, Dean Dr. Sridhar, and our head of department Dr. Sudhir Reddy is unable to come because of some health reasons today, and all my dear faculty members and dear student friends, and also the resource person from our training partner Festo. At the outset, I thank the AICTE for having sponsored this program. That Industry 4.0, our Dean Dr. Sridhar has spoken, a 5 days program, 24th to 28th of August on Industry 4.0, which is very much required as on today. This is to upgrade your skills and learn from industry experts who are like the key drivers of Industry 4.0, and sessions are taught by the experts from Festo, and there will be practical demonstration also, and the universal 3D virtual commissioning software with using 3D virtual commissioning software. I would like to give a brief profile of our institution. This NITTE Meenakshi Technology was started in the year 2001 by NITTE Education Trust. NITTE Education Trust is located in Mangalore. NITTE means it is not an abbreviation, it is a village, name of the village about 60 kilometers from Mangalore, where our founder's wife was born. Meenakshi Hegde was the wife of our founder. Founder was Justice K.S. Hegde, who was Judge of Supreme Court of India. He started small school in 1979 in the birthplace of his wife, Meenakshi Hegde, the village known as NITTE, about 60 kilometers from Mangalore. We are having one very old institution which was started in 1986 in NITTE village. That is NMAM Institute of Technology, where about 6,000 students are studying now. We are also having Polytechnic there, and that is the first campus, NITTE. Second campus in Mangalore. We are having NITTE deemed to be university, one university there, medical college, dental, pharmacy, etc. in NITTE, in Mangalore. And also our head office is located in Mangalore. Our president Sri Vinay Hegde sits in Mangalore. And the third campus is Bangalore, where we are having NITTE Meenakshi Institute of Technology. Also, we are having Pharmacy College, Architecture College, Fashion Technology, NITTE School of Management, NITTE Inter School, etc. There are total about 38 institutions under the umbrella of NITTE Education Trust. And this NITTE Education Trust has started this NITTE Meenakshi Institute of Technology in 2001. We are the youngest institution to get the autonomous status in our country. In the year 2007, we got the autonomous status by the University Grants Commission, New Delhi. And we also got the accreditation by the National Board of Accreditation under Tier 1, because our college is autonomous college where we are having freedom of having our own curriculum, our own method of examination, issue of grade sheet by the college. Only the degree certificate will be issued by the Visvesvaraya Technological University to which the college is affiliated. We are having about 5,000 students and 325 faculty members, and about 106 faculty members are with PhD degrees, and other 78 are pursuing their doctoral programs. We got accredited by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council with grade A+, which is valid for 5 years from last year, 2019. So less than 10% of the institutions in our country, they get A+ grade by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, which is an accrediting body under UGC. We got A+ grade. And under NBA, which is also another accreditation body, Government of India, we got 5 undergraduate branches accredited under Tier 1. And recently, we got 128 ranking under the National Institutional Ranking Framework, the Ministry of Education, Government of India. And also, last week, we got the 3rd rank in Atal Innovation for the India under private colleges. We got the 3rd place all over India. So, the credit goes to our management, our students, our faculty members, and also our parents who are supporting. And the college is having 7 undergraduate branches leading to BE degree and 7 MTech programs, MBA, MCA, and also 11 departments are recognized as R&D centers to pursue their PhD programs. In our college, 40 members have registered and they completed PhD in our college, and so many faculty from other colleges also they are doing their PhD in our college. We got our funded projects, more than 12 crores running in the college. The funding from Visvesvaraya Technological University, Department of Science and Technology, Department of Information Technology, Vision Group of Science and Technology, Government of Karnataka, like that. So several students are also working in these projects. They get some small stipend of 5 to 8,000 rupees per month. They are working after the working hours. Under the vision of our advisor, Professor N.R. Shetty, there are 6 multidisciplinary research centers in the college which work day and night. One is the research on Center for Research on Small Satellites, and where we designed and fabricated small pico satellite less than 1 kg of mass, which was launched with the help of ISRO on 12th July 2010 to an orbit of 637 kilometers above the equator. We are also having unique ground station in the college, which is patented. We are having the other center, robotics, where our students have designed pick and place robot, which has been kept as a permanent exhibit in Birla Science Center, Hyderabad. We are having nanomaterials and MEM center, supported by Indian Institute of Science. We are having design, engineering, process simulation. We are also having aerospace engineering and IoT, another center, and also power engineering, another center of excellence. These centers, they work day and night. Any student and faculty can work there. They are doing their PhD also in these centers. Some students are doing their internship, because in our autonomous system we have made internship mandatory, having 2 academic credits. So a lot of hackathons are being conducted by our students, and our students are getting several prizes. We are publishing a lot of papers. So college is moving forward, and I'm happy that our Department of Mechanical Engineering has initiated this program. It is a 3 series sponsored by AICTE. Already one was conducted last week. This is a second series out of third. Second, there is Industry 4.0 from 24 today to 28th of August, 5 days. And our technical partners are Festo. I thank them on behalf of the college. And my appeal to all the participants is make the best use of this available opportunity, and also involve yourself in the hands-on sessions, which will be given by our training partner Festo. And there will be e-certificates to be issued to all the participants who successfully clear the online quiz at the end of the training program. So I wish you all the best. I wish this workshop, the short-term training program for 5 days, I wish this all the best and grand success. So thank you, one and all.
Thank you very much, sir, for inaugurating the program. This particular program is unique in the sense that we are conducting this program in association with industry partners. So in that regard, this plays a special mention that Festo India Private Limited has a long association with Department of Mechanical Engineering. Now I would request Mr. Harish Nachanani, who is the head of Didactics Division of Festo India Private Limited, to speak few words.
Good morning, the management of NITE Institute and all the participants who have joined from across the country. It is a pleasure to be associated with NITE College, who are taking a lot of initiatives from their side in terms of establishing the lab, in terms of interacting with the industry, in terms of enhancing the knowledge of their students and also the faculty together, so that the outcomes from the learning can be as per the needs of the industry. So from our side, we are really happy to contribute in whatever way it's possible. We have tried to prepare this short-term training program in a way that it can assist all the participants, that they also have some hands-on practical. So I think my colleagues will be sharing as you go down into the program, where we have virtual softwares, and we'll be pleased to share 1 or 2 months of licensing with all the participants, so that they can practice some hands-on virtual programming for PLC, for robotics, which is, we would say, a precursor to Industry 4.0, the simulation part. Yeah? And we also feel this will help you all faculty members to see how you can use the virtual tools in today's difficult times, where there has to be a lot of a blended learning in terms of part online, part face-to-face. We will evolve with different kinds of learning, and we feel a support from our side with the virtual tools will help you also to envision how you can take up this further in the regular course of delivery. So we'll be happy to support you, and please feel free to ask any questions. Maybe questions during the program time may be short, so we will be happy to even support your questions offline directly, or even through the NITE Institute. So I wish you all a good time, and please feel free to give us your queries and feedback anytime during the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harish. Thank you very much for your cooperation. With that, I would now like to introduce today's inaugural session speaker, Mr. Sendil Kumar. Mr. Sendil Kumar is basically serving as a training manager in the Didactics Division of Festo India Private Limited. He basically has over 3 decades of experience in manufacturing and training domains. For over 32 years, and he has expertise in the fields of pneumatics, hydraulics, PLCs, and mechatronics, and various other industrial application-oriented systems. He is basically an industrial engineer, and he has around 6 years of experience in shop floor manufacturing. With that, now I would like to request Mr. Sendil sir to kindly take over the platform, and if he can just start with the session 1. Hello, Sendil sir, are you able to hear me?
One second, Prashant. Good morning to all. I think you are hearing, but I'm speaking from my microphone. All of a sudden, my system is not accepting the speaker actually. I'm trying to solve that. But anyway, in the meantime, I will just keep speaking to you on the phone as such, because I am logged on to the phone and also to the computer. Let me see, because my presentation is in the computer only. Let me see how it can be solved. So, of course, I thank you for the nice words what you have given about Festo, as well as about the expectations in this program. So before we start, I just wanted to inform you that we will be starting the day 1 session on introduction to this automation as such. Why we are doing this reason or the purpose of inclusion is like, because if you are going to Industry 4.0, the primary requirement is at least we should have some sort of automation as such. So how is this automation happening? Is with the help of these sensors, actuators, and controllers, which we will be discussing today. So let us now get into the topic of the industrial automation. So my presentation. Okay, I think you can see my screen right now. Of course, that is on my laptop, but my voice is muted. But anyway, we will call that for the second half. Okay. So, industrial automation is. So, industrial automation is one requirement which is going to be the essential part before we get on to the Industry 4.0 as such. Because at the first place, we should have automation. So only if we have automation, then it is possible for us to get along with other technologies as such. As you know that in this Industry 4.0 is a evolving technology, or it's a revolution which began with the advent of many emerging technologies, like you had the augmented reality or big data or whatever that is associated with this. So all these technologies enable Industry 4.0. So we will first look at what is this industrial automation is. So we will look at the thing, like before we go into this industrial automation, let me introduce Festo. So Festo is the world leader in the industrial automation and training domains as such. It started in 1925 with the woodworking equipments, and later on there were other divisions of Festo in its milestones. If we see in 1952, the Festool was started. Festool is the power tool company, a sister company of Festo. Then in 1957, we had the Festo pneumatic division as you see it today, which was born in 1957, where we had an exclusive production of pneumatic components components which are used in the industrial automation. Then in 1965, we had the Festo didactic, the learning arm of Festo started in Germany. The reason being that even in Germany, the situation was that not many people knew about this pneumatics, and that resulted in the owners taking the initiative so that more and more people know about this technology and start to use them in the industry as such. So if you look at the Festo, it's spread across 61 countries where we have our own production unit. It is also having after sales in 176 countries as there. Then there are about 250 branches. Of course, we are having about 3 lakh automation customers, and there are about 20,000 employees and 56,000 didactic customers alone as such, and we are basically 3.1 billion euro turnover company as such. Festo India operation is headed from Bangalore as such. There are 14 branches. There are 7 training centers in India. We started our inception in 1963 when it came to India in Coimbatore. So further on, it shifted to Bangalore with its production as well as other functions that are happening. So right now, about 530 employees are present as such. So we are ISO certified company. We also have a own R&D activity happening in Bangalore. So there are many residential engineers who take care of the supply of components to different users as such. Of course, you might have seen the expo trainer being available at your places, which visits the institutes as well as the industry, where we educate people about the latest components and technologies that are available. So our automation activity is both into factory automation as well as in process automation. So that is which we cater to the industry. For the training, we have the didactic division as so the didactic division takes care of training and consultancy both in institutions as well as in the industry. And of course, we have learning systems to offer as such. One is the seminars which we offer. The other one is the learning systems as such. So of course, there are about 40,000 products in terms of the cylinders, then both linear as well as the rotary actuators. Then we have the electrical drives, we have the grippers, we have the handling systems, we have the valves, there are the sensors, there are the vision systems as such. And of course, we also have electronic controllers, the PLCs and air treatment equipments. Of course, we give the control cabinet as one of the thing like. So if you look at Festo didactic, it is a Greek word which means to instruct, to impart as such. It promotes the use of automation in the industry by educating the users. Festo didactic has its own product. They are no different from what is being used in the industry. So basically they have adapters which can be easily fixed onto the board so that you can easily connect them and rig up any circuits. We are present in about 75 countries and there are about 300 employees all over the world. So if you look at Festo didactic, it offers a holistic solution in the form of hardware, software, teachware, exercises, which is in the workbooks and the training and the seminars, along with other related services for spreading the knowledge in the institutes as well as in the industry. So there are a lot of softwares that are offered from Festo because we believe in a holistic solution. So FluidSim is one of the softwares very popular in the institutes. Of course, we also have the Syros education, which we will be using in the second half and also in the tomorrow, the second half as such. So this is a mechatronics software which is actually used to simulate whatever the mechatronics applications are involved as such. Of course, we also have many other softwares like InTouch and other things like that. So we will now get into the introduction to automation. So of course, automation in the industry can be performed in many ways. So one such thing is pneumatics, hydraulics, and electrics and electronics as such. So the choice of big application or lineation inclination towards pneumatics. The reason being, which we will see little later. So of course, there are automation happening with other energy types also, like hydraulics and electrics, but pneumatics is predominantly being used, or it is synonymous with automation as such. So that is what we are going to look at in the coming sessions as such. So if you are looking at the reasons for selecting this working media, especially the pneumatics as such, so basically it is force and the stroke length are the primary considerations. The reason being, force and the distance through which this force is applied is what is work. So naturally we are trying to use this energy in order to work. So when we are employing this energy for doing work, we need to see whether it is adequate, that is in terms of the force exerted and as well as the distance reached through applying this force on this particular energy type. So that is where we need to look at this too as the main consideration. Of course, we might have different sorts of motion. Maybe we might have linear motion, we may have a swirling motion, or maybe a rotary motion. So we need to look at whether this sort of energy can offer this particular thing. Of course, in the selection process, there are other considerations also which we have to give a consideration, because in terms of these secondary things, if we are going to overlook, that might result in the failure of the application in the shop floor. So one such thing is the speed as such. So speed is one important consideration which we need to look at when we are making the selection. Of course, we make a big investment in our selection of this energy type. So we need to also look at the service life which can be offered by this energy or the components involved with them. So of course, reliability is another important factor which we need to look at, because if we have a reliable selection of the components, then we have a trouble-free performance as such. Of course, energy cost is also another thing which we need to look at, because economics is one important factor, because we are going to do many million types of actuations as such. So then we also have to look at whether it is operatable. Then we can store this energy type, and we look at whether it is overload safe. So if you look at overload safety as one consideration, pneumatics has advantage in the sense, like if you overload these components to whatever its limits are or beyond its limit, then still the components are not going to be damaged, because they will again function normally when the force is being removed as such. So of course, explosion proof consideration is also another important requirement, because many a times we may use these energy types in very hazardous conditions, like where chemicals are handled or where ammunition is being used. So in all these places, we need to look at whether it is suitable for such purposes. So if we look at what is the purpose of, or what is this pneumatics, how this name was coined. So pneumatics in Greek means, or pneuma in Greek means breath or wind. And that is how the name pneumatics had been coined as such. So it deals with the properties, motion and behavior of air. So it is basically the use of this energy to transmit and also control the energy, so that through the use of this pressurized gas. So that is what is this pneumatics means as such. So we were looking at the considerations we are looking at when we wanted to choose the energy. So we are always particular about what is the force being exerted with the help of the pneumatic application. So if you look at the force, you need to limit it to 50,000 newtons. It's not that pneumatics cannot generate more than 50,000 newtons. The force is a function of pressure times area. And once you start increasing the area, you can derive any big force you wanted. But the reason for limiting it to 50,000 newtons is because it is a indirect form of energy. This energy is not God-given, it is produced. In the sense, we use electricity and then make the mechanical movements and compress the air and get this energy which we are going to use it into the cylinders. So when we are doing this, so naturally we have to be very judicious, because air cost very much, in the sense like every additional bar of air is going to increase exponentially. So if you increase pressures to very big pressure, very high pressures, more than 6 or 8 bar, then also it is not very suitable. At the same time, if we are going to do 100, 200 cycles a minute, and if the cylinder is reciprocating up and down 100, 200 times, then you can imagine how much of air is being used in each of those strokes as such, and finally it might result in spending air in a huge amount, which might not be very economical, because we are using pneumatics in automation. And automation, you can imagine, look at the situation where we print some 1.5 lakhs newsprints in an hour, or maybe many lakhs of milk sachets being packed, or maybe confectionaries, or whatever is the item. They are going to be at a very fast rate. And in those situations, if you are trying to use pneumatics with a very big force, then naturally we might not be breaking even. So that is where we have to limit it to about 50,000 newtons. Similarly, the displacement is another factor which we need to look at. So displacement in the range of 2 to 3 meters is what is going to be best considered. Because, hello? Okay. So please mute your mics. I hear a huge noise. So displacement is one other factor. So usually about 2 to 3 meters is what is the displacement that is recommended with pneumatic actuations. The reason being that as the farther we extend our cylinders from the bearing area or the bearing cap, the vulnerability of this cylinder getting bent or break is more. The reason is the bearing area, if you extend further, then naturally what happens is the possibility for small loads to bend this rod or buckle this rod is is a possibility. That's where we are going to limit it to about 2 to 3 meters as such. But in that situation, does all applications on pneumatics is limited to about 2 to 3 meters? That is a question which we need to look at. So pneumatics can even be applied in about 5 to 10 meters stroke length also, but we need to look at some other special type of cylinders known as the rodless cylinder. So we will look at those things a little later. Of course, one big advantage with pneumatics is the speed at which it is working. So the nominal speed is about 1.5 meters per second, which is very high speed for applications as such. So with the electronics associated with it, we can even reach to about 5 to 7 meters per second. So this high speed is not matched by other energy type like hydraulics, where we have the top speed of about 0.5 meters only as such. Of course, as we saw, there are many other reasons for choosing pneumatics. One is the availability. The availability is because the air which is present everywhere around us can be compressed, and we can make this energy available at whatever location we wanted to use them as such. So this is one big advantage with using pneumatics as such. So we try to use pneumatics for this reason. Then, of course, it can be transported over a very large distance. Even 1,000 meters also is possible without any significant loss in pressure. So that is why we choose pneumatics as energy type as such. And of course, the performance from the pneumatic systems are very uniform, in the sense like they are not affected by temperatures and pressures. So that means you can work even up to 200 degrees centigrade and even 30 bar pressure without significant change in performance of the actuators as such. Of course, cleanliness is one big important thing used, the reason used in many industries like textiles, printing, pharmaceuticals, and all these places, because the leaking pipes don't contaminate, because they leak, but they will not result in any contamination because the medium used is air. So naturally, we can use them to whatever extent in those things with those leaks as such. So that means it is very clean. So of course, explosion proof is the other reason. We are using only 5 to 6 bar of pressure in our application. The components are rated for about 8 to 10 bar. So naturally, they cannot create any explosion because they are sturdy enough. The metallic body of the valves and the cylinders don't explode at that pressure as such. So naturally, the advantage of using pneumatics is it doesn't require any additional firefighting equipments with this arrangement as such. So these are some of the reasons for choosing pneumatics as the energy type. So that means we look at whether it can offer the required force and I can be in a position to do the work. So for which we limit it to 50,000 newtons and 2 to 3 meters of stroke length. If in special situations, we can even go up to 10 meters as such. Then secondary factors like cleanliness, transport, storage, and all these things were also aiding in the selection of the pneumatic energy as such. So we now look at how this energy is being produced as such. So basically, the compressors are those which produce the pneumatic energy as such. So you have two types of compressors. One is one principle is accelerating the mass at a very high velocity and deriving pressure energy. The other one is by containing the air mass inside a chamber and reducing the volume of the chamber. So these are the two principles generally employed by the manufacturers of these compressors in order to give the pressure as such. So basically, if you look at the reciprocating and rotary compressors, they employ the principle of containing and pressurizing the air as such. So basically, the reciprocating compressor, they can produce anywhere between 0 to 15 bar as such, and you have something around about 20,000 meter cube of air per hour can be generated as such. So any pressures are possible with the help of this reciprocating compressors, which actually produces the compressed air at a very high pressure. Then there is also the rotary compressors, which can be a screw type or a vane type or a lobe type. So they are also suited for pneumatic applications. So the screw type of compressors find wide applications inside the industry. Up to 25 bar pressure is possible, and about 60,000 meter cube per hour is possible with these sort of compressors as such. So very often we find the rotary, the screw type of compressors being used. Of course, the vane type of compressors, they are suited, but they don't produce very high pressure ranges. Maximum 7 bar is what is possible. And the flow rate is also not that high as the screw type of compressors as such. The lobe compressors, they are falling under the rotary compressor, but again, not very high pressures as such. Similarly, the dynamic compressor, screen is not visible. No, I am in the presenting mode only.
Sir, visible.
Okay, now?
Sir, screen is visible.
Yeah, please let me know because
Screen is not visible now also, sir. Screen is visible, sir.
screen is okay. Please let me know in case if no, I see one of the other laptops is not visible with the screen. So how many of you are facing this problem? Is it a big number or one or two? Can you tell me how many are having screen?
Yes, sir. I am also, not visible for the screen. Please pin Setu. There are two Setu in the
Yeah.
participant.
Because I'm looking at my mobile to see if it is there. In my mobile, I don't see the screen. That's what I'm
Sir,
asking.
your screen is visible. They need to pin Setu. There are two Setu.
Participant heads to print.
Okay. So in the dynamic compressors, you have the centrifugal and the axial compressors. So basically, these compressors use the mass acceleration principle. Of course, very high velocity of air is being driven through this turbine wheels, by which you get a small pressure about 4 bar, but a huge flow volume about 5 lakh meter cube per hour is possible. So only you have a very high flow rate possible with this sort of compressors, but not a very high pressure, hence not being used in a big way in the pneumatic applications as such. Once we have produced these compressors, the advantage with pneumatics is that you can store them. So basically, you can store this compressed air in reservoirs, which you can design it according to your requirement, so that even 8 hours of production time can be supplied with this pneumatic air. So once you store it, of course, you have the advantage of cooling the air so that you can maybe remove some moisture that is present with the compressed air as such. So then what happens is you can distribute it to your different locations where the service units are there, which further takes care of treating this air. So basically, the air distribution in your arrangement involves primary treatment and secondary treatment. The primary treatment is nothing but maybe drying, cooling and drying, which can be done with air-cooled arrangements or water-cooled arrangements, and then drying with the appropriate methods as such, which we will see little later. So the other than that, we also have the storage, that is the reservoir, which can cool the compressed air, and finally it can be given out into your network. So usually the networks are spread across in a ring, so you can maybe tap those requirements from the top at an angle so that water cannot climb into your application as such. Similarly, there is a gradient, say 1 to 2 degrees, so that the water can be collected at the end of the arrangement as such. So that prevents moisture getting into your application. So we saw that there are different drying possibilities as such. In spite of cooling the air, still air has got moisture in it. So you can employ one of these methods. So the membrane dryers, which are maybe cartridge type, but maybe specifically used for only applications which are very critical. Then we have generally the absorption drying, where it's a chemical process, like you add some calcium carbonate or sodium carbonate, something like that, which has got a very high affinity towards moisture, but it is not regenerative type, because you have to remove the chemicals again once it is saturated, and you have to add a fresh load. But in the absorption drying, molecular sieves, activated alumina, silica gel, and this sort of materials present in these two chambers. So you can send this air into those chambers, by which these materials absorb this liquid and then give you the dry air. Once they get saturated, you can divert the air to the other chamber and regenerate this earlier chamber by passing dry air, so that you can use it again. So in the refrigeration drying, you have the air passed through an heat exchanger, where the heat is getting exchanged with the incoming air and the outgoing air. Then it is passed through a chiller zone, where it is chilled further, and you have the condensation happening, and finally you have the dry air resulted as such, which can be used into your application. Of course, after having dried this air, and you can now straight away use into your application, but generally we use a secondary treatment in every application. That's where you find the filter, regulator, and lubricator in every application. So the filter is nothing but an arrangement where air is made to pass from one end to the other. So in doing so, what happens is it passes through a swirl plate. So once it is passing through the swirl plate, what happens is you have the air getting an angular twist, by which huge particles like moisture and dust gets centrifuged, and the air hits across the baffle plate, and it is driven into the filter cartridge, which is usually a 40 micron filter. So what happens is the air from outside passes into the inside and then gets filtered and resulting into the outlet as such. That is how you have the filter working. So of course you can go for ultrafiltration to whatever extent, but you need to look at how much of pressure drop is going to happen. And of course excessive pressure drop is actually costing you money, because you spent electricity and produced it, and then finally you are blocking it with the help of the filter and resulting in more pressure drops, which can be not an economical option as such. So wherever necessary, you can go for ultrafiltrations. Then you have the pressure regulator, which are again used because the pressure is pumped from the source at a high pressure, somewhere around 1 or 2 bars higher than what is required at your application. So these pressures have to be adjusted to your requirement, for which we use the regulator. So the regulator is an arrangement which reduces the pressure. It doesn't increase actually. So as you tighten the knob, it acts on the diaphragm. The diaphragm in turn lifts the plunger, and the air starts to flow between the inlet and the outlet. Now, the inlet and the outlet are filled by the diaphragm at any given time. So as these pressures are going to vary according to the situation, maybe it's a dynamic sort of a situation where on the outlet there might be a block or something, the pressure is going to be increased, or maybe at the inlet also it might happen. So that is felt by the diaphragm here, and the diaphragm is either maybe pushing out or maybe it is drooping down here. So when it is coming down, naturally the spring on this inlet of this pressure regulator narrows the passage and starts to give little air as such. Or when the pressure is falling at both the sides as such, then the plunger is going to be lifted out because we have set a preset pressure here. So by which the plunger lifts up and creates more passage for the air to move out. So that way you have the diaphragm fluttering in and out, by which you have a constant secondary pressure maintained from this arrangement as such. So thereby we can result in a very uniform supply of pressurized air into the arrangement. So, of course, lubricators are other things like, but generally in training situations, we don't use lubricator because it's not that frequently being used in our application. The reason being, lubrication is already provided by the manufacturer in the components. They are only required in case if there is a necessity, in the sense like if you are operating at a very high frequency, or the diameter of the cylinder is very huge where the surface area is more, or maybe the cylinder is getting heated up or something like that in specific applications. In those situations, wherever required, or where there is a lot of wear and there is necessity for replacement of the cylinders very frequently, then we can think of using lubricator. But in the training situations, usually they are not being used. So if you look at the control, so the pneumatic controls has distinctive 5 groups of elements according to their functional responsibility inside the circuit. So there are certain group of elements whose only purpose is to supply air, that we call it as energy supply unit. So it can be a filter, regulator, lubricator in the application. There are certain other elements, groups of elements who are only responsible for initiating a signal inside the circuit. We call them as a signal input element as such. Then we also have signal processing. Many a times we need to process the signal according to the logics that might be expected in the process. So we also have processing element.
Kindly note the screen is not visible, sir.
Screen is not visible. 1 second. Yeah, it is visible from our computers. So I request all participants to maybe.
Usandi Kumar is visible, not the other. How can we print?
So
Only
the screen is visible, sir. I request to you to kindly continue. Those who are facing issues, I request, we have posted the YouTube live stream link. They can have a look at the screen via YouTube also. So for us, the screen is visible. I request you to please continue, sir.
Okay. Okay, so now, of course, it is a technical issue. Maybe the bandwidth is not supporting because we have about 200 people in the thing. Like, so possibly you can look at the YouTube streaming also. So, and of course, one other request is please maybe don't switch on your camera because that will consume bandwidth. So more people can at least join and see the screen as such. So that is another request which I would like to make. So elements of this signals, that means we need to require to process the actuations according to certain logic. So that is where we try to use the logic elements as such. And of course, we also have a final control element, which are actually directing the cylinder in the forward or in the return motion as such. So we have this group of elements known as a final control element. In addition to this, there are the working elements. So if you look at the working element, there is the linear and the rotary actuators usually represented. So if you see all these things, we have each element having a specific function inside the circuit. Thereby, we could optimize our arrangement and realize whatever pneumatics is capable of. It is also possible to have a cylinder and a valve, but you might be overloading because the function of processing, the function of directing is all taken care by one element, thereby the efficiency is not possible. So we need to have a definite structure like this if you are going to use pneumatics in an optimized way as such. So that is where we need to include all these elements inside the control. Look at a situation where you have a 320 dia cylinder, and if you are going to connect it with your push button, so what could happen is a push button which can give only 75 liters of air per minute, so will deliver only 75 liters, and this 320 dia cylinder might have a very huge cavity inside there which has to be filled. So it might take maybe a few minutes before something can be filled and the pressure can be reached, and finally the cylinder starting to move. So we might see cylinders working at 1.5 meters or even 2 meters in the normal situation, but in this situation we have overloaded the arrangement with one device supplying the whole big cylinder there. So naturally it might not result in 1.5 meters per second. So that is where we need to see that every element has got only one specific role as described in the control arrangement here. So if you look at the energy element or the working element, which is nothing but the cylinder, so the cylinder form under two categories. One is the linear actuator and the other one is the rotary actuator. So if you look at the linear actuator, they can be either a single acting or a double acting from any manufacturer for that matter. So in the case of a single acting cylinder, you have many designs that are possible depending on what you require as such. So basically a double acting cylinder has got a single ended type. You have rods coming out on both the sides, which are known as a double ended side type. Then we also have rodless cylinders so that we can get huge stroke lengths mechanically as well as magnetically coupled rodless cylinders. And of course, there are plenty of special cylinders to suit every application. Similarly, we have rotary actuators, both limited angle of rotation and continuous rotation. But continuous rotation don't find any application inside pneumatics. The reason being that you can as well use the electric motor to create those rotary motions instead of converting that into mechanical movements and deriving pressure energy and finally reaching to rotary motion as such. So that is where you don't find rotary actuators inside the pneumatic control engineering. But of course, it is not there. We cannot say that it's not totally available. We find these rotary motors in certain applications because pneumatics has got the advantage of overload safety. If you look at an electric motor, it can rotate only 1450 RPM. But if you were to look at a pneumatic motor, it is more than 1 lakh or 2 lakh. So that is where certain manufacturers try to devise a pneumatic motor for certain specific applications, like you might use it in a dentist drill or in a portable grinder. In those situations, you can use where you want to reap the benefit of using it for high revolutions as well as for overload safety reasons. So that is where generally it is not finding application in pneumatics, but specific products incorporate pneumatic motor in their application. But limited angle of rotation is possible, both 0 to 90 degrees, 0 to 180 degrees, 0 to 270 degrees, something around this range can be possible because we are looking at controlled motions as such. A single acting cylinder with its IS symbol here, what you see here. So basically this IS symbol doesn't tell you how it is constructed. It is only going to give you a symbolic functional representation, but not on the design as such. So it has got a single port and it has got a piston with a spring there. So air is made to enter into the cylinder cavity and pressurize the piston, and the piston advances, compressing the spring and reaching to the end. The moment you release this air, instantaneously the spring which has accumulated the force is now able to drive it back to its home position as such. So you can use the cylinder for only one side only, in the sense like you cannot use it for dragging some load. So that is where you have to be careful in using this. So when there are forces at both the sides, you cannot use a single acting cylinder. So you have to look at the double acting cylinder, but it saves about 50% of the air that is being consumed because the return motion is through the spring there. But not a very efficient arrangement because you are going to use this pressure for its return motion by compressing the spring as such. So naturally, you cannot derive the complete force that you can theoretically estimate by F is equal to P times A as such. So marginally about 20% is lesser because of all the springs and the frictions that are happening in between. A double acting cylinder, on the other hand, has got 2 ports. It doesn't have a spring, so that is what is the symbol here. But physically, you can recognize a double acting cylinder by seeing the ports there. So if you find 2 ports there, then naturally it's a double acting cylinder. So you can use it for exerting force both in the forward and the return direction. That is what is the advantage here. The forward force is not the same as the return force. It is the return force is slightly lower as such. So that is you have to look at what is the force that is being delivered in case the same load is acting on both the sides as such. Because you have an annular area on this rod side, we call this as the rod side, and this we call it as the piston side. The piston side has got the full surface area against which the compressed air is acting, resulting in a force that is different from what is happening here. Because on the other side, the rod side, this much of the rod area is not available for the compressed air to exert force. So that is why you have a lesser force on the other direction as such. Of course, you can get in any diameter from 6 mm to 320 diameter cylinders as such, and stroke length somewhere in the range of about 2 to 3 meters as such. So you can start with even 1.5 mm stroke cylinders also that are available, but as a special cylinder. Of course, in the normal range, it is available from 6 diameters to 320 diameter. Of course, as I told you, the forces are not the same in both the directions. So naturally, we have another variety of cylinder known as the double-ended cylinder. So unlike the earlier cylinder, you have the rods extending on both the sides in the cylinder, and this is the IS symbol for the same. So you have these 2 ports on either side through which air can act on this side and also on this side, thereby driving and extending the rod on either sides as such. So that is where you have the double-ended cylinders. That means you have a uniform force exerted from this type of cylinders. But the reason for having, other than the uniform force, is you could have a through hole in this arrangement by which you can supply air and create vacuum. So you could handle jobs which was not earlier possible. So that means you could use it for handling. And also you can use it for pick and place arrangements, or maybe for filling arrangements, like where you can pass some shampoo or hair oil or whatever is the thing through this rod and make your automation such that they can insert those things into the cans or whatever is the arrangement that is present here. So you can use it for pick and place as well as for filling applications, and that is where this sort of cylinders are being considered in the applications. The other cylinder is the rodless cylinder. So we are always limited by this stroke length because you have this axial force and also the radial force that are acting, which makes the cylinder to bend or to buckle when it is farther away from the bearing area. So in order to prevent this, we need to have a cylinder which doesn't have a rod, and that is where we have the rodless cylinder coming into picture. So the rodless cylinder saves about 50% of the space because everything is within. That means you have the yoke here, which travels between 1 and 2 meters like this from this end to that end, but nothing protrudes outside there. So that means in the normal cylinder, you have the cylinder's barrel as well as the stroke length that is being involved there. So that means you have twice the application area to be used in this place. Whereas in this case, everything is contained within. So naturally, the yoke is moving on top of the barrel here. So naturally, you reduce the space. Application space. So that is where this rodless cylinder are being used. Of course, there is this mechanically coupled rodless cylinder where the yoke is connected to the piston and it moves from this end to that end as you pass air into the one of these sides. So when it moves here, a patented sealing band seals the dovetail shaped underneath here. So you have the air which is actually inside this cavity. So when it is trying to move further from this initial home position, so it's the sealing element tries to seal it and act make this compressed air to act only on the piston, and it moves further. So on the other side, what happens is the sealing band is also being peeled on the other side, and it is moving towards the other side. So here you don't have air. So all the air actually in front of the piston is driven out through the port here, and at the same time simultaneously it is being released. So that is where you have the zip-like action happening inside the thing, like, and you can release any big stroke length. So that is what is the thing like. So this is how it looks like in the case of a rodless cylinder as such. So of course the rotary actuators, there are two types of rotary actuators. This is the symbol for the rotary actuator. So the rotary actuators can be rack and pinion type, where that means it's a geared arrangement. So the pinion starts to rotate because of the rack, which is being driven by the compressed air. So therefore you have a very high torque possible as such. So 150 Newton meter is possible with this sort of rack and pinion arrangement. You also have the vane type of rotary actuators, which where to the shaft you have a vane blade that is connected, which is moving inside the cavity. When you pass air this way, it rotates on the other side. When you pass the air on the other side, it starts to rotate in the clockwise or anti-clockwise direction. But you cannot generate a very high force torque in this situation. Maximum is about 20 Newton meter is possible. So these are some of the actuators what we just now looked at, and they are used in pneumatic applications in varied situations according to different applications. Of course, now the other important thing is the valve, which is used inside the pneumatic control. Everything is a valve because we are using a medium that is air. So they have to be either blocked or maybe opened in one side or maybe closed on the other side, something like that. So the valves are used for starting the flow, stopping the flow, or the reversing the flow as such. So the valve, as per IS standard 1219, at least 4 informations are necessary so that you can make this uniformly understood by all users as such. So one is the switching position, the other one is the port that has to be mentioned in the diagram in its display, as well as how it is being actuated and how it is being returned, and also what is the flow path inside there. So all this information you might see in any valve's representation so that you can have an uniform understanding. A position is represented by drawing a square like this. If there is one square, it is one position. If there is 2 squares, it is 2 position as such. So the flow is represented by a straight line or a slant line, and a blocked port is actually shown with a T mark as such. Then we also have to show the ports. The ports are shown usually on the right hand side. That is the normal position, whereas this is the actuated position. So in the normal position, if there are 4 lines drawn, it means 4 ports. If there are 5 lines drawn, it is 5 ports as such. So of course, you also need to show how it is being actuated and how it is reset. There are different means to actuate and reset. You have manual, mechanical, electrical, and pneumatic means to actuate the thing like, and each one has got a specific symbol in order to mention them. So you could use any of these manual means to show it on this side, telling you that it is actuated manually, or it is being actuated mechanically, or with electric arrangements, or with pneumatic arrangements. So if you look at the designation of the valves are designated by indicating the number of ports, which is the first number here, and the number of switching positions. So that means any valve represented as 2 by 2 means it has got 2 ports in it. That means you make 2 possible connections, and you also have 2 switching positions. So that means the valve has got dual possibilities to function. It can function like this, what is shown here, as well as like this. Similarly, a 3 by 2 valve has got 3 ports for making the connections. So one is a supply port, one is the outlet port, and the other one is the exhaust port. And also it has got 2 positions here. So you can function it this way or make it function it this way as such. So it can be either a closed arrangement. When the inlet is closed, you call it as a normally closed. When the inlet is initially opened in the default situation, then we call it as a normally open as such. A 5 by 2 valve has got 5 ports, 5 connections to make, and there are 2 possible positions to shift between them. So you could use a 5 by 2 valve or a 5 by 3 valve, which has got 3 possible ways to function, and maybe 5 positions, 5 ports through which you can make the connections as such. The ports are numbered as per letter as well as the number marking. The number marking usually 1 or P is representing the inlet port, 2 or 4 is representing the outlet ports. That means these ports are connected to the cylinders. 3 and 5 are the exhaust ports to which you connect the silencers, or they can also be lettered as S or R, whereas the outlet ports can be either 2 or 4 or A or B. Similarly, you also have pilot ports for switching the valve in case if it's a pneumatic arrangement, like 10 is going to result in a supply between 1 and nowhere. That is 0 is, it is not going to connect anywhere. So similarly, you have 12, it means 1 and 2 is getting connected. So you have 14, which means 1 will connect to 4 if you have a signal here. Similarly, 1 will connect with 2, that is why it is known as 12. So 12 and 14 or 10 and 12 are the different possibilities what you can have in terms of the valve port markings as such. So these are some of the valves which you can see, just to give you an understanding on how really it is in the physical form as such. Now, we have covered the cylinders and the actuators. Now we look at the electro-pneumatic part, because our actuators are going to be even electrical as such. So electro-pneumatic is nothing but an arrangement where you give electrical signals instead of the pneumatic signal as such. So by which you need 2 parts inside your hole. One is the pneumatic part and the electrical part. The advantages of using electro-pneumatic is higher reliability. You can have easily adapted to other devices like the sensors that are being used. And of course, you can very easily connect those circuits with the help of this electro-pneumatics as such. So as I told you, there are 2 parts, the pneumatic part and the electrical part. So our objective is to provide electric current to this solenoid here, by which the valve can switch and extend the cylinder. So in order to get a signal at this place, you need to have a control circuit which is electrical as such. So like in our pneumatics, you also have input devices, you have the processing devices, and you have the output devices. So the signal flow is from the top to bottom as such. So that means the signal 24 volts starts to flow from here. As the switches are closed, it acts on the relay. So once the relay is getting energized, its contact is closing on whichever solenoid it is being connected, and that gives you the output to the solenoid, which you can realize here, and that makes the cylinder to move forward as such. So of course, there are different elements as used as input and processing. So you have the contacts which are normally open contacts, you have the normally closed contacts, or a changeover contact. So these contacts are used to process the signals. Similarly, the contacts with the actuation means also helps to provide the signal into the circuit. So this is the other possibility here. So what is a relay? Relay is actually an electromagnetic switching device. So it consumes very low energy, only it takes a very small voltage and switches the valve as such. So it has very low maintenance, very fast switching, about 2 milliseconds only it takes to switch the thing. Like you can adapt to many parallel paths to switch many devices according to the number of contacts as such. So they can be used for producing the logic also. So basically how the relay is functioning is, this is the coil of the relay. So in the coil, there is a winding which can be separately powered. So you, depending on what is the rating of the coil, you can get 24 volts or 12 volts or whatever is the coil, 5 volts or whatever it is. So once the coil gets energized, the soft iron core within the coil is getting electromagnetized. So once it becomes an electromagnet, it attracts whatever is in front of it. Here it is the armature there. So usually you supply at 1 and the contact is going to close on 2. That means 1 and 2 have got the supply. But when you make it as an electromagnet, the contact switches and 1 and 4 starts to get the supply, and that is how the relay functions. So we will just see how it happens here. So you see the poles getting switched once it becomes an electromagnet and draws the armature towards it as such. So Similarly, the solenoid also works on the same principle. A winding is there on top of the soft iron core, and this soft iron core gets an electromagnetic force. So once you energize it, it starts to move in one particular direction, which is been restricted with the spring, and it overcomes the spring force and tries to lift up and create the passage for the compressed air to flow into it as such. So you have the solenoid coil. Once you energize this, the solenoid now allows the air into the arrangement so that it can be switched and you can realize this position. Similarly, when you energize this, the open valve will now start to close once you start to energize this. Similarly, the solenoids can be on one side or two sides. If it is on the two side, we call it as a memory valve. In whichever case, whether it is a pneumatically actuated or electrically actuated, a double solenoid or a double piloted valve is known as a memory valve because it will retain the position of the last signal applied until it is encountering a counter force on the other direction. So of course, here is what is the arrangement for you to look at. So one is getting blocked because the plunger, because of the spring here, is closing the port here. Once you energize this, the plunger lifts up and the air starts to flow into the outlet. Similarly, in the case of a solenoid valve, a 5/2 valve, which you can see, the port is closed on 4, so no air can reach into this. Only 1 and 2 is getting supplied. So when you give this compressed air on this, or when you energize this coil, the plunger lifts up and the air which was now waiting at this place now acts on this piston here and moves the piston towards this side and blocks on 2 and makes the passage for 1 to flow into 4 as such. That is where you have a solenoid working. So this is how it looks, the solenoid, the single solenoid and the double solenoids inside your arrangement. Of course, we are going to create many logics that are possible here, which are part of Industry 3.0, because we are going to control the cylinders and valves with the help of electrical signal, either with the help of a relay or with the help of the PLC. So here we have the switch closed here. So when you close the switch, there are two switches. One is the start switch and the other one is the stop switch. When you close the start switch, now what happens is relay K1 gets a supply. So the instant it gets the supply, the contact closes because it takes only 2 milliseconds to switch here. So it closes on both these places here. So K1 closes on this path, K1 also closes here. So now you have two parallel paths supplying to this device here. That means you have the possibility to release one of them and retain this supply to be there. So that means once you press and release your button S1, K1 gets the supply and lamp S1, H1 starts to glow forever in spite of releasing this S1. So in order to break the circuit, you have this closed contact of S2, which when you press it for a moment, it disrupts the supply on K1, which results in the contact losing the connection. So naturally it opens up instantaneously and it results in lamp switching off. So again, you have to initiate with S1 so that you can thing like so. This sort of a relay getting latched with its own contact is known as a latching circuit, which we in this case is a dominant reset. Similarly, we also have a dominant set. So now we will look at the sensors. So there are different sensors that are available. There are basically contact type of sensors and non-contact type of sensors. Again, these sensors again fall under two categories. Either a binary signal or an analog signal can be produced from these 6 sensors as such. So in the contact type of sensor, we have a limit switch, which is basically used in applications here. So a limit switch expects a physical contact for the sensor to give a signal. So like in this door where you have the contact type of sensor here. So once it closes, that means it comes and hits against some fixed element by which you can trigger a signal output as such. So again, sensors, there are different sizes, there are different types. There are magnetic reed switches, inductive sensors, capacitive sensors, again optical sensors falling under through beam, retroreflective and diffuse type of sensors. Then there are contactless magnetic sensors, there are Hall sensor and many other types of sensors. An optical sensor has got at least 3 different varieties. The through beam, where collector and emitter are apart. So when an object comes inside, so then it is not falling onto the collector. So naturally it is getting a detection signal as such. So in the case of a retroreflective sensor, the light is passed, falls on the reflector, a mirror sort of object, which is again falling back onto the collector here. So if anything disrupts this, then you have a signal. So there is also the diffuse type of sensor where the light is emitted. If an object comes here, each body has got some amount of reflectivity. Based on whatever is the thing that is reflected back, it can fall on the collector and you have a signal here. So similarly, an inductive sensor where if an object comes into the electromagnetic field, then it is getting excited, and based on the excitation, it trigger voltage and finally amplified to give you as an output. Similarly, a capacitive sensor where a electrostatic field, when you bring some object in between, its electrostatic field gets excited. Based on the threshold, it is going to give you an output. Similarly, a reed switch, which is nothing but two metal contacts kept apart inside the glass tube. When an object, a magnet usually, comes near that, the contacts get held together and you have the output coming out of this sensor as such. So you also have inductive type where when a magnet comes here, it induces a current inside. Based on the evaluation, it is going to trigger an output if those magnetic fields are getting induced with current. Of course, these are different symbols that are used inside the thing. Like, so you have the inductive sensor, capacitive sensor, the optical sensor, the magnetic reed such, and you also have ultrasonic, which can fall under a open as well as a closed type of sensors are available. Now we will look at the other important thing which in today's automation in the industry 3.0 revolution has come into picture as such. That is nothing but instead of reusing the relay, we use the PLCs as such. So a programmable logical controller is nothing but an industrial controller which monitors the input and evaluates or executes the program and gives you the output as seen in this figure here. So the input signal, when it is given into the CPU there, based on what program we have dumped into it, accordingly it tries to evaluate and give an output, and which can be connected to any device here. So you can increase the productivity, you can enhance the quality, you can use the less energy in using the PLC as such, and improved safety features are possible with this thing. Unlike the relay, which uses more power because they are physical elements, so you induce a lot of coils inside there, and that carries more current there. So naturally that results in lot of heat, and of course reduced life cycle as such. So of course the relay is going to occupy more space because they are physical things like that, and they are very complicated because you have to run kilometers of wires in order to make your automation task possible. And of course in realizing such arrangements, it takes long time, so naturally time consuming as such. So you can, with the help of a PLC, produce logics, you can create timing functions, you can make counting possibilities, you can handle analog signals, you can have special modules like the PID modules, you can use arithmetic functions, you can use communication modules to communicate with other devices as such. You have the HMI interfaces possible as such. So you have many possibilities with the PLC as such. So basically the sensors which are giving the signals are given into the input module, which converts the signal from whatever physical source it is getting into a voltage or current suitable for this PLC to handle, or the CPU to handle. So once it passes through that, the power supply is external. So it once you give the program into it, or the program is loaded into it, it executes line by line based on the input signals there and what we have asked in our program to generate the outputs, which are again reconditioned back so that it can suit our application or to the rating of the PLC, because all these processes are working under 5 volts and they have to be converted into 24 volts output signal or whatever is the rating of the PLC. So a physical analogy here, you have the input and the push buttons which are forming the inputs, which can be given into the PLC. A program is dumped into it, and based on the evaluation, you have the outputs which can be reconditioned so that it can suit to the requirement in the field. So basically, the PLC does a scan. So as soon as you power up, it starts to go through a certain process. That means it reads the input, then tries to execute the program line by line and make some diagnostic and other routine functions, and finally write this in outputs into the outputs at the end of the output scan, which can be finally used for the sending the outputs. So basically, this happens cyclically depending on the power of the PLC. It can happen many thousand number of times so that it can evaluate in that fast manner as such. So basically, there are different languages to program, but what we are very familiar is the ladder diagram or the function block or the statement list, which are very popular. So we have the ladder, which is nothing but two parallel lines shown inside the circuit with a coil, a parenthesis as such. Whereas the function block is nothing but blocks, rectangular or square blocks into which you symbolize what sort of functions you are going to use as such. So we will look at this thing like, so there are these two contacts very prominently used, or these three things are prominently used. If there are two parallel lines there, you are asking to check if the value is, or if the signal is present, check if the signal is high, whatever is the thing like. So if you put a line across these parallel lines, you are looking for in your program whether that signal is low. So this is what it means as such. And of course, while that is going to be here. So these parts we will see in the afternoon, as well as in the coming days. We are going to see the physical programming of the mechatronic systems as such, where we have the same set of exercise being used in those situations in the afternoon session. So here is an arrangement where the wiring is something like this. These two contacts are connected through the PLC into the output K1. So now, if you wanted to say generate an output based on this thing like, so S1 is actuated and S2 should not be actuated, you are going to represent it like this. So that means you wanted this signal, this has to be high. So check if it is 1. Similarly, you don't want the second button to be pressed, so only this button to be pressed. So you are negating it and making the thing possible here. So for the conditions to have, or for the output to appear here, all the conditions on this side has to be true. So this is true, that means if you have pressed it, and this is true if you have not pressed it. So naturally, that will result in an output at 4.0 as such. Similarly, in this case, you have S1 to be actuated and S2 not to be actuated. So that means you have here S1, that means it has to be high. That is what is the problem statement here. Whereas the S2 need not be high. But physically, because it's a closed arrangement, it is high. That is what it's mentioned here. So that means in this situation, instead of taking a negated contact, even though the problem is saying it is not to be actuated, so if it is not actuated, it is actually conducting current into the PLC. So naturally, these two situations have to be high for the results to be high as such. So you have again S1 and S2 to not to be actuated. That means S1 is to be activated and S2 not to be activated. So when you press S1, so this whole thing has to be true, as I told you, for the output to be true. So if I have S1 actuated, S1 is to be actuated, what will be the situation? The current will not be flowing here. So that means it is a low. That means it has to be 0 at this place. So that is why it is shown with a negation here. And then you have this to be high. So if you don't act, similarly, we also can put them in series where we have realized an AND logic here. And similarly, you can put them in a parallel arrangement where you can make the OR logic possible here. So of course, this is what you are going to see in the afternoon, where you will have real systems which are virtually presented to you on the software. So you could have this software and try to program. Of course, we are going to do it in two parts. We are going to show you just to begin with how to simulate those things in a single arrangement. Like that means you are going to use only one actuator so that you could make those outputs appearing there for the conditions being met. But a real-time situation, as in the industry, doesn't always have one actuator. There are many combinations of these actuators. So that is where we are going to bring them in a virtual manner. So we have the MPS stations which are used in the world skills. So these stations, like in the real situation in the industry, depict those arrangements like clamping, ejecting, feeding, braking, distribution, or whatever is the elemental activities that happens inside the automation in industry. So these elementary functions are collectively put together so that you can realize that. So if you look at this thing, there are at least 3 actuators here. So you are going to have a coordinated action in your program so that you could realize those things. So that we will be doing it in the afternoon session, where you will first observe this. Maybe whoever is interested to continue, we can also provide you the license by which you can make this thing possible at your end after learning this thing. So this is all we wanted to present here. Of course, we have finished right on time, maybe 5 minutes that is overshooted here. Of course, I'm sorry for that. Initially, of course, still I don't have my headphones addressing the thing. It is my computer mic or onboard computer speaker. My microphone is working, so I am talking on that. So if you have any clarifications or questions, please let me know. So if we can spend some few minutes before you forget about these things like that, so we can address those questions and then carry on with the break here and come back to see in the afternoon session some practical demos. Any questions, please?
Sir, why don't we replace single acting cylinder port by Tesla valve geometry?
No, can you repeat here? Why don't we?
Why don't we replace single acting cylinders port by Tesla valves geometry?
What is Tesla valve, sir?
Tesla valves is actually, it increases the flow rate twice or 3 times.
Okay. So now, what is your requirement? Whether you want to increase the flow rate. So that is what you need to look at. So when you are making the selection, you have to see that you have the valve appropriately sized, because we can start with 40 liters to about 5,000, 6,000 liters. So if you are going to make a choice of something lower and trying to reach your objective, then what happens is it's a wrong selection. When there is a possibility, straight away you can choose that particular sized valve so that you can get the required flow rate.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. What are the causes of failure of sensors? So of course, using a sensor is a art in itself, in the sense like you can place the sensor, you can maybe get those things like, but in order to get a meaningful output, you have to have a good knowledge and understanding of the parameter or the functional relationship of those sensors, because you might detect something else what is not required instead of the purpose of using that sensor as such. So sensors can fail maybe if it is which type of sensors you need to look at. So maybe you are connecting to a over voltage or something like that, or else maybe the sensor, in the case of an optical sensor, the lens over there is being clogged with some foreign particles, something like that. It might not give you a meaningful output, something like that. So these could be some of the possibilities. But if you look at a magnetic sensor, if there is a magnetic field so around it, which is more powerful than what is being used inside the piston there, then that might also induce a current. So that could be one possibility. Like, so we need to look at what is the situation into which it is being operated, whether it is being used in the appropriate manner, in the sense like there are some temperatures that are to be adhered to. So if you are crossing those limits, there could be a possibility that the sensor is going to be failing there. The operating voltage also is going to be one of the things. Like if you are going to draw more than what is possible rated for that sensor, let us say you are connected a electric motor to a single phase or three-phase motor to the sensor output, then what could result? It can immediately burn out the contacts inside the sensor. So you need to see what are the ratings and decide upon how to use it to make it safe for your application.
Sir, what could be the limitations of pneumatic in the selection process? Is there any particular area where pneumatic is not advisable or something? Before selecting, going for a pneumatic,
Okay.
should we care for that?
Yeah. Now pneumatic. You need to look at the selection very accurately. Can you maybe switch on your mic as such? Okay. So the selection is one important thing. So you need to realize that there could not be two alternatives for an application. You can decide or very pinpointly go into a particular arrangement, maybe a pneumatic or a hydraulic or electric one, based on what are the advantages and disadvantages. So if you have two choices, that means definitely one of them is going to score against the other. So if you see that there are two possibilities, then that means you have not made a evaluation to whatever the merits and demerits of each of those energy types as such. So we could use pneumatics in any application. I don't see the thing. Like only limitation is the force. It doesn't mean that pneumatic cylinders are not used where huge forces are there. In the 1900s, when there were the pneumatic presses, they were being used. But you know that in the press, there is only maybe 15-20 strokes in an hour happening as such, because there is a huge setup time in those arrangements. So they were using pneumatic presses to exert forces bigger than 50,000 newtons. But in today's automation, if you are going to pack biscuits, say maybe 200 packets or 300 packets, because the packing arrangements are specified by the rate at which it can be produced. So naturally, when you are doing at that rate, you have to reciprocate at that rate. So you have to be very judicious in terms of selection of the cylinders that you are going to use there. So you have to make a very appropriate choice, and that choice can be always narrowed down to one particular energy type. Yeah.
Yeah, sir, I want to know that whether, suppose I have a problem and suppose I perform a simulation in this Zero software.
Okay.
And can it be possible that the output can be deployed in my application? Like I have a PLC, separate PLC, so I want to implement the application using that PLC and the so can I deploy the using my PLC?
Okay, so Firas has got a very big advantage in the sense like you can directly connect with an internal PLC. If you don't have the internal PLC, you can also use an external PLC of any make. So what happens is you can connect it to any PLC with the help of the software, that is the Easy OPC software that is available there. So it can connect to any PLC. That doesn't matter whether it has to be only Festo PLC. You could connect all the PLCs in the world.
Rockwell and Siemens both will be integrated.
Can you come again?
Suppose I have Rockwell PLC or Siemens PLC.
Yeah.
So can I integrate both of them?
Yeah. So now Siemens PLC comes as
I think we lost the connection from you.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Yeah.
Hello.
Sir, we can hear you.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
You're audible, sir. Kindly go ahead.
Hello. Can you hear me?
You are
Yes,
audible.
yes.
Kindly go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my computer ran out of power. So
Not an
I'm
issue,
speaking, yeah, I am speaking in the other computer through my colleague who to present in the afternoon about Firas and all those things like. So basically, you were saying that whether it can be connected to any PLC. Of course, Siemens PLC you can connect by default. So the OPC server is actually configured for Cirrus and Festo PLC, that is the Codisys PLC, but it doesn't mean that other PLCs cannot be connected. So you could use another device known as the EC port, which actually can be used to connect any PLC with the Cirrus arrangement.
So I have to install the driver, third-party driver.
No, the driver is available by default if you were to use the easy port.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So that we will see in the afternoon. We will show you how exactly you could connect to any PLC as well as with Festo PLC. We will be trying with Festo PLC with a soft PLC. That means you don't have a physical PLC within the computer. The computer resources are used as the PLC there. So how you can do it? But similarly, you can. It is only switching the outputs, the inputs and the outputs to different means as such. So the OPC server has got those adaptability.
Yes. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello.
Okay, so any other questions from the participants? Anyway, so in the afternoon we'll be joining again. Yeah, please, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for a very nice session, sir. Sir, I have written that when we are running our software for this Festo and we are connecting with another PLC, then our software is working as a server or a PLC is working as a server.
Okay, so now you which software you are using?
Suppose, say, for example, our Festo software I discussed, and then they are capable to connect with the OPC server.
Okay.
So suppose I have a Siemens PLC, and when I am running the PLC, the Siemens PLC itself working as a server, and our software is working as a client, or we have to connect, or we have to develop a server in our software, and then we have to connect with the PLC.
Okay, so now you have two things. One is your consuming device may be a physical circuit there, and also you have a PLC that is going to be there. Now you are going to connect both of them. So naturally what we are going to use is a OPC server as the intermediate. So that means your signals from your PLC or whatever Siemens or whatever is a thing, he is getting adjusted such that it can be delivering the outputs into the field there. So you are going to use a dedicated software which is being given along with the Cirrus software. So that is known as the EZ-OPC, which can be acting as the server, and your Siemens PLC is the client there.
Okay. So, sir, this is the OPC server is supporting OPC UA and OPC DA both?
This EZ-OPC is not currently supporting OPC UA. It is doing only DA.
Okay, so only 3 parameters we can get.
Yeah.
Okay, and sir, I have seen that in one slide you mentioned that the ISO number of representing the DCV, that is the ISO 1219.
Okay.
1219.
Okay.
Okay, so that ISO number is only for representing the DCV, or we can also represent the circuit for component number standarding?
Okay, so if you look at those things, IS 1219 is used for representing the components inside the control circuit. But if you want to represent the control circuit itself, you have the cylinder represented as 1.0, the final control element represented as 1.1, and those responsible for actuations are represented with even numbers, and those responsible for return motions are going to be represented with odd numbers. So there is again this convention that is being used as such. But nowadays, you also have some other convention in the sense like a valve is represented as V, a actuator is represented as A, and motor is represented as M, and other devices are represented as Z. So both conventions are also possible. This IS 1219 is predominantly used for component representation.
Okay, and sir, which ISO number is generally used for circuit representation? Because in circuit we have to define the name of each and every component.
Okay.
So is there any particular standard number available?
I can refer and come back on this. So it will be part of 1219 only, but I need to check before I confirm it. So what is this convention 1.0, 2.0 and something like that, 1.11 and 1.2, whether they come under the thing like. So as far as I know, this letter convention is the latest one where actuators are represented as A, valves are represented as V, and any other component Z. That is how it is nowadays shown. I will confirm whether it is falling under the 1219.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, and very such a nice presentation by you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, sir. I think with that, probably we'll call it, end of the session 1. So I would request all the participants to kindly join us for the afternoon session, which is scheduled at 2 p.m. The link for the afternoon session remains the same, so you can just join using the same link what you used for the morning session. So with that, I would like to thank you, Senthil sir, for that excellent presentation. So we're looking forward to the afternoon session.
Okay, definitely. Thank you very much for your patience.
Yeah.
Okay.
I request all the participants who are there here, please kindly fill up the feedback form for the session 1, that is morning session. The link for the session, the feedback has been posted in the chat box. It is also been posted in the YouTube link also. So you can just have a look and you can just give us your feedback. Thank you one and all. Let us meet in the afternoon.